So this morning we're talking about our row maintenance on the planters. Even though this is a exact emerge, the units itself is basically the same, and a lot of the adjustments are all the same. So first and foremost, whether we have a new planter or an old planter, our biggest area is the pinch point that we're worried about. And the best way to check that pinch point is just take a business card, put that up to where in between the discs where they touch, and then measure that distance in between. So the book will tell you anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 1/4. And generally we like to be a little higher than that. We like to start around 2 inches and go up to 2 1/2. So here we look, this one is like 1 3/4. So we're a little bit short, especially since it's a new planter. So we take out our cards, and we take our unit, or our disc unit, off. And if there's one thing I can get anyone to remember, this is actually left-hand thread on the left-hand side and right-hand thread on the right-hand side. So if you have trouble getting this nut off, stop and think about what you're doing. There's 2 places that have left-hand thread on every unit. It's the left disc and the left closing wheel. So always remember that. Now if we take our disc off, we'll see that we have shims on here. And from new, generally there's 7 shims on one side and 6 on the other. Every shim is 1/4 inch on our pinch point. So if you're starting with an older machine putting discs on, make sure you get enough shims to start with so you don't have too much pinch point. So we will take one off. Back in between the discs. Measure it again. We're at just 2 1/4. So now we've got that set what I consider acceptable. Now one thing you need to remember, new discs tend to get a sharp edge on the back side. So if you get new ones that are 2 1/2 or even a little above that, don't be too afraid of that, because once they run a few revolutions in the field, and that edge wears off, our pinch point will shrink back down to where it's supposed to be. By having that pinch point a little bit stronger, that allows us a little bit more forgiveness if our planter isn't perfectly leveled front to back. So that's why we want to stress that, so we get a nice, good trench. And we always want to check our scrapers and see what kind of shape they're in. This one is the newer style. No springs in there because it can't go through that drive. But you'll see anything from the round ones to this style to a tungsten blade. All work just fine, but check and make sure that edge is not completely gone. Buy a new one and lay it together so you can see how much wear there is. That'll help you decide when it's time to change. Also, there is a little rubber boot that covers that bearing assembly. Always make sure that gets put back in. Just like that. The next thing we have to worry about is our tire. You can see how these tires are shaped. That's to give us our nice compaction for our seed trench. As these wear, we adjust that with this adjustment right here. Okay, we just loosen the bolt, this thing screws in and out, moves this wheel in and out against the disc. We want that to actually rub the disc a little bit. And one of the keys is you want to make sure and lift your wheel so that it's at the point of ground point, for your seed depth, and make sure it's rubbing there. Don't just take it for granted down here. You can see how loose that is. But if you push it up to your depth, you'll see that it's touching, and that's where we want it to be. Moving back here a little bit, here is our closing wheels. Now we want to check a couple things with those. One, make sure the bearing is tight on the wheel itself. Make sure that our pivot point here is fairly tight. If you can get more than an inch of travel back and forth, it's time to replace that housing. That's what's going to do your pinching of your trench. So it's very critical. Also, take the time when you get out in the field to set it down and drive a little bit and see where that center of the row is on those closing wheels. And we want to make sure that we have a nice tight fit and it crushes the sides together and not one side or the other. That's adjustable here, and it's also adjustable with a slot up underneath here where the two bolts are. So there's two places to gain that. If we have our wheels too wide and we're trying to seed something shallow, it's going to push too wide and push that center row up, and the sun will split that and the seed will dry out. And vice versa, we don't want it too narrow on a real deep seed, especially like corn. We want to widen that out, so we make sure and crush the trench instead of just collapsing the top. Also, if you look where these things are bolted, there's a double set of holes, so you can offset the two wheels one in front of the other a little bit. And what that's for is mainly for trash like rocks or corn stubble that wants to wedge in here and drag and cut out your trench. That allows that to work its way through a little bit of an angle. So that's what that's for. Take a look and make sure you've got that set right. One thing we can show you on this unit, this is an exact emerge. So it's got a belt drive. It's electric motors that drive it. This is the belt assembly here. When you store this thing, release that pressure. Let the belt become loose. That way it'll keep it from stretching and getting a memory. But then make sure that you go back together. That arrow is pointed down. That means it's in the tension position. Also, it's very easy if you're doing any cleaning in here to break these little plastic tabs if you're not careful. So make sure to take the time to do it slowly. They're not cheap to replace. Our seed sensor on these is built right into that housing. So if you take this off, you can clean that a little bit back there and make sure you're not building up with dirt or talc or just general seed dust. Then when you go back in, same with the seed boot, always make sure you get your sensor plugged in good and make sure that the bottom is in tight. By doing that, I can pull in and out and I can't move it. If you can move that, you then know you've got trouble.